Okay, let's kick off because we got lots to cover. I'm really excited to be here. I'm thrilled that you all have joined us for this privacy careers panel. My name is Dan Levy. I am the lead privacy lawyer at TD Bank, which is a Canadian bank and a US bank, mostly on the East Coast of the United States. I came to the bank from the Central Intelligence Agency, where I handled cyber and privacy issues, and before that, at a big law firm here in Washington, D.C., where I'm located. It's amazing to me how many folks reach out to me all the time to talk about privacy careers, and I think it's great, especially when law students and others want to have phone calls and discussions. And I talk to absolutely as many people as I can. There's not time to talk to everybody. And a while back, when I was talking to my co-moderator, Kendall, who you'll meet in a moment, I said, wouldn't it be great if we brought together some senior privacy folks and get this information out here? People can talk about what they want to talk to, because I'm only one man and can talk to one person at a time. But when we do a panel like this, it's so great to talk to everybody. And so in a second, I'm going to introduce you to our panel, who are all amazing. But I just want to say up front, so not everybody has to repeat the standard disclaimers, is that we have a bunch of important people who work at important companies, but they are here on their own time today, speaking for themselves and not for each of their companies or law firms. And so let me flip it over to my co-moderator, Kendall Maylor, real quickly to say hello.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the interest. Very, very happy to be here. I guess as a brief introduction, my name's Kendall. I work here at Lawrence Harvey. We're a global recruitment business, technology business, but I have a specialism within the data privacy and legal technology space, specifically within financial services. So day in, day out, I network with a bunch of active and passive candidates and clients within the space, helping them find their next job or helping them build and grow out their privacy programs and teams. I work here in New York. We have offices all across the US, but our privacy team started over in the UK with the origination of GDPR, and here we are now. A little bit about myself, but I will turn it back to Dan to introduce the rest of the panel.
Thanks so much, Kendall. And before we get going in earnest, I want to say I really hope that this can be a discussion. There should be a chat function where folks can type in and ask questions as we go. We're happy to interrupt with your questions. My intent is to finish a little bit early, so we have time for your questions as well. So it would be great if you all could do that. Maybe we'll figure out a way to unmute folks as well. We're working on that. I don't love elongated like introductions of each panel member when we do these type of things, but today, because I think folks are here to hear about the careers of the folks on the panel, I've asked each one of them to introduce themselves individually. And so we will go through each of them right now. And I think we'll flip over to Ron first to say hello.
Well, thanks. Hello, everybody. Appreciate you joining, and thanks for the invitation to join you today. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer of Truist, which is a merged entity of SunTrust and BB&T. We came together a couple of years ago and are headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a lawyer, still active lawyer, but not practicing in a legal role. I'm, as I mentioned, the CPO in the compliance risk management group. I came at this from the legal side after about 6 years being a sports reporter. I went to law school, started specializing in communications law, media law, and then found my way into privacy, which at the time was a subset of communications law, and have seen it really, really grow and explode over the last 15 years now, being dedicated to privacy. And so I still have that legal background, and I think we'll talk a little bit about some of the legal skills and how they transfer over, but am now in a different role as the CPO.
Thanks, Ron. I'll head over to you, Steph.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Price. I work with Dan at TD Bank. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer here. I am not a lawyer. I do not have a legal background. I like to tell folks about how I got into privacy, just because I feel like this is an experience a lot of people have had. I was at a division happy hour and was voluntold to be the privacy designate in my group. I went to school for marketing. I was doing marketing. So, you know, my first day in the privacy role, I had no idea what I was doing. I was very overwhelmed, but it became a passion of mine. And I've been now doing privacy for about 15 years. So it's been a crazy ride, but very fun.
Well, at TD, we are all glad you were voluntold for your role because we love working with you. Ali, you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Jessani. I'm a senior associate in the Washington, D.C. office of WilmerHale in the Privacy and Cybersecurity Group. WilmerHale is a global law firm that focuses on a whole range of issues, and I'm part of that privacy group there. I also had kind of an accidental start to privacy. I was at a different law firm right out of law school where I was in the broader regulatory practice. I was doing securities work and insurance work, and I got dabbled into some privacy projects and realized I really enjoyed it, for some of the same reasons that everyone here likes it, because it really was a thing that affected me as a consumer in my day-to-day life. And so I also happened to be starting at a time when the California Consumer Privacy Act, which we'll touch upon, I'm sure, was first going into effect. And so I was able to kind of make that an expertise of mine as a first year, and then was able to leverage that into the privacy group at WilmerHale. So happy to talk more about any of that on this panel.
And certainly, last but not least, Rachel.
Hi, well, thank you so much, Dan and everyone, and Kendall, bringing us all together. It's really exciting to be part of this panel, and some great careers, and all coming from different angles. As you can probably hear by my accent, I'm not from the States, but which has actually been a good thing for me in terms of privacy. So I actually started out more than 15 years ago in Australia, actually as an intellectual property lawyer, software licensing, tech outsourcing, advisory, and privacy back then was a tick box exercise. There was some data, but not a big deal. And much like Ali, there was we were looking at reviewing the Australian Privacy Act at the time, and that was sort of my first real dabble in the review and new privacy laws. I then moved to Hong Kong, where progressively again there was a change in Hong Kong's privacy laws. So that part of my practice just grew and grew. While I was I started at DLA Piper in Sydney. I was in Baker McKenzie in Hong Kong. I was able to go in-house at Microsoft, at Puma, in Gucci, some fun companies, and be working on their privacy program on the inside. And then again, luck and circumstance, when I moved to the States, and in 2016, that GDPR had just come into effect, and there was anyone who could spell privacy at the time and had a heartbeat could pretty much find a job. So I was very lucky to arrived in the US at the right time, and was really able to bring those sort of years of expertise in the APAC region to bear in the US. Since I've been here, I've had a variety of roles in consulting at PwC in-house. And today, which I probably should have started at, I'm the Assistant General Counsel, Senior Vice President at Mastercard. I'm responsible for our US and Latin American privacy program, as well as our internal operations, so marketing, HR data, and M&A data. So it's a pretty large remit. And don't ask anyone why the Australian is in charge of US privacy, but I can't tell you about Australian privacy, that's for sure. So back to you, Daniel.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, everybody, for those intros. And to me, one of the most interesting things about privacy is all the different angles people are coming at it from. You can see everybody kind of had a previous role, especially folks who have been working for a while and somehow found their way to privacy. And Ron, you said something interesting, which is you are a lawyer now in a non-legal role. And you can see even on this call, we have lawyers in non-legal roles. We've got lawyers, we've got non-lawyers. To me, that's a really interesting part about this space. And so, Ron, I was hoping you can touch a little bit on, some of the different privacy roles that are out there, from lawyers to chief privacy officers to compliance roles.
Yeah, of course. No, it's a great trend because, even like 5-6 years ago, we would still have these conversations about how important is it to have a law degree. And I would have even back then said, it's pretty important, you really need that law degree. I don't think it's the case anymore. Steph and I are good examples. We're in very similar roles, coming at it two totally different angles, one legal background, one non-legal background. There's a lot of different ways to get where you want to go. The other thing that's really great to see is, and another conversation that has shifted, is we used to have this debate about, where should privacy sit in the organization? Should it be in legal or compliance or info security or marketing, or in lots of different places it could sit? And I think the answer now is it needs to be everywhere. You have to have privacy presence in all those groups. And so it's just led to more opportunities, both for lawyers and non-lawyers. And one trend we're really seeing is a lot of folks who have backgrounds in data, like data governance types or records governance, professionals. They see privacy and how exciting and innovative it is, and they've had a lot of opportunities to come into the privacy industry and add a tremendous amount of value just because their background in understanding data, how it works, how you're collecting it, sharing it, using it, et cetera, has really made a big difference in the privacy industry. So we're seeing a lot of people just coming into the industry from different angles, and the number of opportunities and diversity of opportunities is really extraordinary, really over the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Ron. And I like what you said too. Like, every company seems to have a chief privacy officer, but how they roll up in the organization, in my experience, is different across the industry. And it makes a huge difference and sometimes says a lot about how much an organization values privacy, where they kind of stick their chief privacy officer in the chain. Super interesting. Ali, over to you, because Ron's a lawyer in a non-legal role doing compliance work, but you're doing kind of bread and butter legal work at a large law firm. So tell us what that looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of building on Ron's point of how diverse the privacy practice is within the different types of roles, even in a purely legal role, the practice is so diverse. And it's part of what I love about it, is I get to do so many different things on a day-to-day basis. If I have to describe my role in, a short sentence, I would say I'm a regulatory compliance lawyer, right? Like I analyze how laws apply to different companies and give them advice based on that. But what that looks like can completely vary. Sometimes it's drafting a privacy policy or a consent form or a data processing agreement. Other times it's just giving advice on legislative trends and where the law may be going. Other times it's advising in the mergers and acquisitions context, right? Companies are buying other companies, and a lot of times what they're buying is data assets, right? And so they want to assess the risks related to that data. And then, when things go wrong, there are investigations, there's litigation, there are all types of roles where privacy lawyers are now being deeply embedded into all of these processes. So if you're, someone looking to get into this field in a legal role, there are so many different things for you to do. And the stuff that, again, what I like the most about it is I get to do a little bit of everything. And I think it keeps things exciting.
And so especially for the law students out there who often ask me, what's it like being in-house and doing privacy in-house? I've been every type of lawyer. I've been at a big firm. I've worked for the US government. I've been in-house. And I'll just share that the absolute best part about being an in-house lawyer is when things get too hard and I need someone really smart to figure something out, you got people like Ali at big firms who you can dump all your work over to and say, I tried really hard. I couldn't figure this out. Then they figure it all out and they send it back, and you can tell the client and you look brilliant. And to me, that's my favorite part about being an in-house lawyer. Steph, you are not a lawyer, but you are a chief privacy officer, which I don't know if that's unique nowadays, but for me personally, I spend my whole day talking to lawyers. And so it's always great to interact with you, some people who aren't lawyers, from time to time. So tell us what it looks like from your perspective.
So it's even better for me, because when I don't know what I'm doing, I just call you, Dan. And when you need help, you call Ali. So I'm like 2 steps back. No, but yeah, so I sit on the compliance and the risk side of the house. So the day-to-day really for a non-lawyer specific role would really, especially in the risk space, is really going to focus on explaining to the business how to comply and doing risk assessments to understand what their risk, the bank's risk appetite or the company's risk appetite. And if you're operating with that, developing policies and standards and doing a lot of, monitoring and testing to that to make sure that we are in compliance. So that's really the main focus, at least from my perspective on the compliance side. I think as Ron said before, we're seeing privacy really everywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be a privacy specific role, but we have privacy designates that sit in the business lines that really need to be that first point of contact and the eyes and ears for the business. So we see a lot of folks that have privacy expertise in fraud, in the insider risk programs, in the information security, in data governance, right? In the AI and analytics groups, and even in HR. So there's a lot of roles out there that would focus on sort of the non-legal aspect, where you're really just assessing the risk and understanding policies and the overall risk appetite.
Steph, I'm really glad you mentioned privacy designates. For those who don't really understand what that is, when you work at a giant place like a bank that has hundreds of business lines, like Steph said, the few privacy lawyers and the chief privacy officer can't be the eyes and ears looking through the whole company. And so these are regular business folks who have sort of taken on the responsibility of privacy, and they get training. And honestly, most of the privacy issues that bubble up from us come from the designates who are issue spotting and saying, hey, I noticed this. I need to raise this up to the privacy legal team. It's really the only way to do it, because I don't know what everybody across the bank is doing at all times. And so it is a great model, and it is a great way for those folks to learn about privacy. And we often see the privacy designates eventually pivoting full time into privacy roles, which is great. Rachel, just quickly over to you, since you, like me, are in-house at a big financial company, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, Dan, it's interesting. You must have a much bigger budget than me when it comes to legal counsel. But so I have I've had a few roles, but law firms, in-house, and consulting. I think where I really love about being in-house actually is, a law firm might pass me off advice, and I'll be like, well, how do I do this? So there really is like, what does this mean for my products? What does this mean for the service? How do I actually implement these laws? And that's what I actually love about this privacy space, and particularly in that really embedded in a business. So, obviously my legal expertise is important, but really the part of my legal expertise that I draw on every day is risk, understanding how to solve problems, like seeing the bigger picture. So that's certainly it. But consulting was a really interesting experience, and I think made me a much better lawyer, actually. And again, this was really important to be able to see what industry-wide is doing, how you actually sort of approach it more logically or more on a risk-based or controls-based system, and really sort of understand that whole consulting model was a really fantastic experience as well. So highly recommend, but much more practical. And I think there is that degree, like Steph and Ron have touched on, you can have a legal mindset and have a home in privacy, or you can have a real operational mindset to be like, how do we take these laws from black and white paper and put them into a practice in an organization? And it's going to look different, because privacy designates might work for you, but it might not work for another organization.
Yeah, I totally agree. As they say, it takes a village. It needs the legal folks, it needs the compliance folks to all work together to get it right. Kendall, I can flip over to you now.
Yeah. This all sounds really, really great, and is really interesting to learn even more about. Because I guess coupled with all of this, depending on where privacy sits within an organization, depends on the different kinds of qualifications and skill sets hiring managers will look for. This is obviously something that's heavily part of my day-to-day as a specialist recruiter within the space, but at least what I've been seeing from my perspective. And then Ron, I definitely want to turn over to you to get your take on this as well. But industry-specific expertise of privacy has become more in demand, at least from what I'm seeing from my angle, which I think is really, really unique. But Ron, would be curious to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it definitely is a lot more in demand to the point now that companies have a really hard time filling roles with the qualifications that they seek at all levels, really, from legal side, CPOs, all the way down to an analyst level. You very, very often see companies saying, hey, we want a person with X number of years of expertise or direct experience with this type of law or this type of thing. And the reality is, there's so many opportunities now in privacy that there are fewer candidates that you can find. And so one of the things that we've started to do with a lot more success is we have been looking for people who are just incredibly motivated in other areas that maybe don't have the privacy expertise, but have demonstrated excellence in other areas and have the skill sets that can transfer over to privacy. And I think that's really good news for people who are very, very new to privacy, because what you're looking for is that motivation, work ethic, And honestly, privacy is a bit of a different type of an area where, you know, the passion about the actual area really matters. You know, you want people who really buy into what is behind these privacy laws. You're not just checking the box for a company. You find people who just really believe in what you're trying to accomplish, and they take it personally, and that shows up in their work, and they learn it so fast, and that it just, you often, like a year or two later, you look back and you're like, wow, I can't believe that person had no privacy experience 2 years ago. Look at them now. You know, I've seen that repeat itself, and not just at our company, but at other companies. And that's good news for everybody who's looking to jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in here in the chat box, and that would definitely be some good advice on kind of how to get started into the space. I guess tagging along with that, I would also just say adaptability and communication skills and knowing how to understand your audience, because you're not always going to be talking to individuals of the same background or with the same skill set. So, you know, talking to those kinds of different people and being able to be adaptable in that kind of situation would definitely be more of a softer skill set that I find to be equally as important. Just looking here at some more of the questions coming in. Dan, you think we want to keep going on? We'll address some of these towards the end.
Yeah, we'll move on for a second, but I really, really appreciate the questions in the chat. We will get to them in a second. I'm going to ask a question first. What I want to get to is to talk about really interesting privacy topics people are working on right now. But before I do that, I want to throw one question to the group, which is a question I get all the time, which is, this space is moving so fast. How is it that you stay on top of all the changes? I know for me personally, I've got like a folder with like 50 clipped articles that I never really have time to read. And I know the way I try to do it. I will say, you know, you're never really an expert on a space unless you become aware of the vast amount of information you don't know. And so like, there's always a little bit of insecurity when you say, oh, I'm an expert. If you say you're an expert in something and you feel like you know everything, then you're not really an expert. You know, a real expert is aware of the chasm of information that they don't know. So I would love to hear from anyone on the panel, you know, what is it that you do to stay on top of a space that is so novel and is moving so quickly?
Yeah, and Dan, if I can jump in and just actually to answer that question, also tie into something with Ron, like I have seen people transform to chief privacy officers in a few years with little information, but it is that, you know, you're really drinking from the fire hose. And I will actually say, even though I wasn't a history buff in school, like, you got to look backwards to look forwards in this and to really be ahead of your game, because yeah, ChatGPT comes down the pipeline. Like, if you understand the frameworks, you understand what it is that we're really trying to do when we say that we do privacy, then you can actually use that framework every time as you're encountering a new privacy program, right? What are the privacy principles that we care about? Transparency, you know, fairness, all those sorts of things. So as much as, and how I keep on top of things is making sure that I actually bed down on a day-to-day, what are my frameworks? What do I really care about? Then I try really hard to stay across the technology, because that's obviously going to be one of the various factors. And then again, I don't know, it's sort of reading. There's a hell of a lot of reading and digesting, but it is hard. And I think that's it, that you actually can never be an expert. Anyone who says that they are is lying, in my opinion. And I think you've got to stay humble, and also learning from your network is the biggest one, because you can't possibly be on top of it all.
I definitely agree that you can't be an expert. I think one area though where you can reasonably pretend to be an expert is with some of these new state privacy laws. It's because, like with HIPAA and Gramm-Leach-Bliley and some of the older privacy laws, there's so much history and so much background. And to your point, Rachel, I think you need to know that background to really have a good footing on where we're, especially in US privacy, because it's such a patchwork and so different. But with these new privacy laws, you can show expertise in an interview or elsewhere by just reading them, right? Like you can read a law from start to bottom, and like that's all the history there is on this law, and you can know as much about it as anyone else does with the information we have in the moment, right? I don't know if that makes you an expert or not, but I think it's a good way for law students to really stand out, or any emerging privacy professional to really stand out in an area and to show that you're really interested is by showing that you have taken the time to learn these new laws. Because at least in the law firm context, and Kendall, I'm sure that's where firms seem to be hiring for junior associate roles is associates to take on these new laws and to really take ownership of them at the firm level.
I think
And
that
I'll just-
advice would be good for even other lawyers, honestly, as well. I think across the board for sure. Sorry, Steph.
No, I was just gonna say, like, just to echo on these points, I think being comfortable working in the gray area, right, and the unknown, like Dan said, like, I'm not an expert because the laws are changing every day. It's evolving. I mean, when I first started in privacy, like hand spam was just coming about because it was like, oh, you can blast emails out. Like, look how far we are past that, right? We've evolved into text messaging, we've evolved into AI, into the social media, right? The live streaming, things like that. So I think a lot of people call it imposter syndrome, right? Like I joke that like I'm not an expert. I don't know everything. I'm constantly learning. So finding the time to collaborate, check in with your peers, check in, with your industry contacts is the best way to try to keep ahead of it. But know that you will probably be operating in a gray or an unknown zone as you navigate, just because it's always changing.
To answer Dan's original question, I think one tool that I use that I really like is Twitter. Like I think there are a lot of good people on Twitter that at IAPP, at other organizations that stay on top of these updates. And that really helps me know, like, okay, this law has been proposed, this case got settled. And I feel like now regulators are using it more and more too. The FTC and the CPPA are active on that space as well. So I think it's a good way to stay on top of some of the updates.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's great privacy organizations pushing out work. And for me personally, there's blogs that I read, but also Ali at WilmerHale, firms like that are constantly pushing out expert advice for free. That's always great too. And so that's how I mostly stay on top of things. Anyway, I am really, really interested, and I know the people on this call are interested too. What are you all working on all day long? Like, what is something interesting that is keeping you busy? Because I think folks probably realize that, I'm a privacy lawyer at a big bank. And so I'm handling routine GLBA questions and other data questions. But as Steph will tell you, because the space is changing so quickly, because the technology is evolving so quickly, and because the laws don't always keep pace with the technology and our employees' appetite for pushing the envelope in all sorts of interesting ways, we end up working on just tons of issues where I am just shocked. I mean, you think about AI and biometrics and all sorts of other changes that what stems from that is all these attendant privacy issues. So, Steph, what is an issue you've worked on in the last couple months that's just kind of an interesting one?
Yeah, so I might even take it back a few years just to go over like the trend that we're seeing. So, pre-COVID, we were all, mostly in the office, right? And you have to follow code of conduct, and there's a badge to get in the building and security protocols, right? And then COVID happened, we all found ourselves home, and we all had to navigate that differently. Like, I'm sure a lot of people just wore sweatpants from the waist down and some slippers, right? Had to put on virtual backgrounds if you didn't want someone to see your house, things like that. At the same time, we saw TikTok take off during COVID, and folks really starting to spend a lot of their free time on social media because there was nowhere else to go, right? You couldn't go out in the public. So some of the things that I've seen are folks who really wanted to have that viral video or really wanted to become an influencer or a social media star. And the problem we've seen is those people have a day job, and that day job may be at a company where their computer screen is in the background, or there's data exposure. So we've seen a sort of alarming increase in folks who are live streaming their day jobs for views or right to gain notoriety online. And while they may think that it's just a funny video that's going to get them some views, right? If they're acting on behalf of a company, if they're wearing their company logo, if their computer screen is visible in the background with customer information on it, right? Then we have an unnecessary data breach and reputational risk that you you need to look at. So watching the social media sort of boom and the amount of information that's being put on social media during COVID when everyone was home was interesting and bizarre to see. Some people actually, I almost found it impressive to see how they could do two jobs almost at the same time, live streaming to their audience and speaking to their audience, but then simultaneously trying to do their day job. Also seeing people who realized if they could game the system, and while working from home, we've seen people who held multiple remote jobs and had multiple laptops on their desk at the same time and would just switch over from one company to another company. So those were some interesting things because, you know, you could get into the HR, the ethical violations, right? From a privacy perspective, like who's accessing the data, who's seeing it once it goes out on a TikTok live stream. I don't know that you can ever reel that back in and get it removed from the internet. It's out there forever. So those are the types of things I've seen through like the COVID pandemic that were actually unique to start working on those cases.
And having worked through that issue personally with you, Steph, I know it's just an area where the laws are not up to speed yet on live streaming because so much of privacy and breaches is the notice part of it, where people's information is implicated. But when something goes out on a live stream, like Steph was saying, there's no really way to account for who saw that or when or what information actually went, especially if there isn't a recording of the live stream. And so a challenging and interesting issue that we work together on. I'm happy to hear from other panelists about how the evolving laws or the evolving challenges have created interesting privacy issues for you.
Dan, I'll jump in on some of the themes you mentioned in terms of, you know, AI and biometrics and the technology boom that we're experiencing right now. I think one of the key roles for a privacy professional is how to help the business leverage that technology to build better products and services. And that can be a little bit of, you know, tricky territory when you're a lawyer or a compliance or a risk person. You know, the easy thing for any of us to do would be to say no and point out, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't do something because there's risk involved and we could end up in trouble, et cetera. That's the easy path out of these conversations. Where you can really add value is figuring out a way to enable the business. You know, how can you make them successful leveraging these cutting edge technologies when maybe you don't have black and white rules that you're operating under from a legal perspective? You know, being creative, being good team partners with the business, and being just very flexible and creative about how to enable their success. That is a key skill set that is challenging for certain folks who are more legal or compliance or risk focused. But that is a difference maker, whether you're an outside counsel or you're in-house or whatever your role is.
So along those lines, Rachel, like when it comes to Chat GPT and other AI that's so new, and I already see employees trying to incorporate it in interesting ways into their work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how are you all dealing with that? What issues are coming out of that?
Yeah, and I think actually just to continue the conversation with from Steph, you know, often we think about privacy and we think about consumer, but I think one thing I mentioned to the panel is, you know, employee privacy and what people are doing at work is my role. Frankly, I'm responsible for the global HR program, but I think it's really rife with privacy issues. And as people even use technology, right, like even or interact with AI, there's data being collected about their interaction, or even all these social media sites is the same concept. So part of one of the issues that we deal with is how do we, you know, like to Ron's point, not only enable products of successful use, but how do we not enable, you know, productivity tools in the workplace, innovation in the workplace, freedom in the workplace, and flexibility, you know, whilst also, you know, protecting, you know, well, utilizing technology, but also protecting our employees, right? So Chat GPT is another one. Can we let our employees use this tool? But that's another great example of just also with privacy, and I think with a skill set, to Ron's earlier point, being just a privacy person or just a lawyer is actually in some ways is not a great place. It's great to have other expertise or experiences, because cybersecurity, IP, you know, all of these other aspects are really, I feel like privacy in technology is really incorporating just much more than that privacy lens. So yeah, I feel like Ali would have some great thoughts as well in this space, being on the client side.
Yeah, no, everything you and Ron have said is exactly what I do on a day-to-day basis, particularly with startup clients who, right, like don't have one lawyer will have no one lawyer who does everything for them will have no lawyers, and they'll come to me with questions that are privacy adjacent, but not really privacy questions, and I really have to be, take a risk-based approach to giving advice, because to Ron's point, it's like you can outline all of the risks, right? And there are risks with anything, right? Like there's always a cybersecurity risk if you're processing data. There's always compliance risks, but like there are companies that are doing really cool projects. They're using biometrics in really interesting ways. I especially have healthcare clients that are finding really interesting solutions to problems, and those are, and oftentimes those are life and death solutions, and those are really helping consumers with their health problems. And so you can take a conservative approach and, and stymie those efforts, or you can give risk-based advice that says, look, this is where the law is, this is where the risk areas are, but like this is how you can promote your product or your service in a way that minimizes those risks and still is compliant with the law. And so that's exactly the kind of advice I hope to give, and I hope that makes me a better lawyer.
Yeah, and just talking out of turn, Dan, but I think to come back to that's where I think skill set as well as experience, like creativity, problem solving, these are really, really important for anyone in this area. And again, knowing where you can take risk, I think is really, really important. Sorry, just to round that out, Ali.
I totally agree with all that. I love that. Sometimes people will say to me, you came from the CIA to be a lawyer at a big bank and do privacy, but I have to tell folks it feels somewhat the same. Well, not exactly the same. The issues are a little different, but the sense that you're on the cutting edge of legal issues because, that's an organization that's certainly pushing the envelope. But in the privacy space, everything is new and you really feel like you're on the front line and all these interesting issues are coming at you all day. And a lot of them are first impression because the law or the technology is new and you really need to work through it. And so for me, there's great overlap there. Kendall, I think we can send it over to you now. We're going to talk about DEI issues and how they relate to the privacy field.
Yeah, definitely. This is huge and at the forefront, specifically at a recruitment firm. But when we narrow it down to specifically the privacy industry, at least from what I see on my end, with a lot of the clients that I work with, privacy is honestly a pretty diverse industry. There's not too many clients that come to us with a D&I issue, which is a good thing. So I wanted to turn it over to Ron because I do believe Ron has some comments to make on diversity and inclusion as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. It kind of goes with what we were saying earlier about, what's so great about the industry and, it attracts all kinds. I mean, it really, it's there's no barrier to entry. There's not like an established barrier that people have to fight through. It's a cutting edge area. And Ali mentioned it earlier. I mean, even just with some of these new state laws, if you're a brand new attorney, you're not necessarily fighting against people with 25, 30 years of experience who you're competing with. It's like, hey, it's new to everybody. So you're not having to fight through glass ceilings. You're not having to fight through some of the stuff that you see in other industries. And I think just naturally, the type of people that privacy attracts are people who are very inclusive, open. They want diversity. They celebrate it. They champion it. They fight for it. And they fight for consumer rights generally. That's just the passion that's behind most privacy professionals. And I think that shows up. I mean, if you look at the output, not just in recent years, but really over time, if you look at the privacy leaders across all industries, there's such incredible diversity. It's something that is really unique and should be celebrated. And we see it continuing. And that's something that I think the industry should be really proud of.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Ron, I think it's inherent with this subject itself, right? Like privacy laws, the promotion of them protects some issues that affect diverse individuals, right? Whether it's sensitive personal information or profiling or things like that. So I completely agree with your point about it is a representative and diverse industry. And I think some of it is just inherent to the area that we're working in.
Great point, Ali. That's why Ali is my outside counsel, because that's a great point I'd never actually thought about before. So that's awesome. Hey, Kendall, we're getting lots of questions in the chat, which I think is awesome. How about I tee up one question now for the group while you kind of collaborate those together. Maybe you can post some of them to the group after that.
Yeah, for sure.
But I want, like, Steph, at the beginning, you were talking about, when a lot of us on this call first got into privacy, the industry was still kind of building up. You talked about it was only CAN spam. I remember back in the day, it was just kind of data breach response. That's what we would do. We would send out letters, and things are evolving. Obviously, things have come a long way. Can you talk a little bit, anybody on the panel, where do you think things are going? What are going to be the new trends? What are going to be the new hot areas that are going to need people really focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, it's more around giving consumers the choice. We're seeing it with the California, right? They're calling it mini GDPR. We're seeing other states start to copy and paste that. I mean, we are seeing a lot of carve outs, me specifically at a bank, we're seeing carve outs for GLBA, but I think people are realizing they've put so much information out there. They really want to understand what's happening with it. So it's not just the data protection as far as, if there's a data breach, we're going to call you and let you know and give you 2 years of credit monitoring, right? It's not the cleanup anymore. It's customers really want to understand, well, what are you doing with it? Why do you have it? Why do you need it for 10 years or 15 years if I'm not a customer anymore, right? So I think consumers are starting to really realize, like, oh wow, look how much information is out there on me, like what is going to happen with it and why. So I think that's probably the main focus I would see, is watching some of the state laws around transparency, choice, the right to delete, right, the right to opt out of sharing, those types of things, which is interesting, because I think before that most people just said, here, take my money, take my info, right, and that was it. Now people are more interested in what's actually happening with it.
Totally agree. Are there other areas people are focused on? Does any brave person want to touch on federal privacy and where you see that going? I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Oh, I can be brave. I'm a bit of a pessimist. I feel like that's going to be a hard one in a few years. A few years out, as hopeful as I may be. Wouldn't it be nice just to have one law? That would be lovely. But I would say, to Steph's point, and actually just thinking about this, funny enough, my husband's in an industry and he kind of laughs at me and goes, oh, you guys are just at the beginning. Like, everything is going to move at some point towards automation and routine. And privacy is super exciting right now because it's still starting out. I think to take that part from the customer story or the consumer story and really having a handle over data, I really see this. We saw in the federal bill that came out last year, privacy by design concepts coming through, which is already established in Europe. That is also seeing this whole breed of privacy engineers and people really baking privacy in the back end and connecting the tech and the privacy. I think that is a really emerging space, which actually takes a lot of different skill sets as well. So I think that is someone who has that, or I'm even seeing in the chat, people having change management experience. I think there is certainly future for a lot more divergent experience coming to that privacy story as it stabilizes and matures in the long run.
Yeah, Rachel, I'm glad you mentioned the chat too, because I really love to see the questions that are coming in, and I want to make sure we have a minute to answer the questions people want to hear about. So like in the last 10 minutes, maybe Kendall, you can throw out some of these questions and we can get the panelists' thoughts.
Yeah, most definitely. I would say, from a general theme of all the questions that are coming in, it's about starting a career in privacy or having a background that's outside of privacy. Like, I have all my certifications, but I'm still getting, like, I'm not getting a job within data privacy. Is there anything additional you feel that these individuals would be able to do?
So I'm going to jump in on this one because this is my favorite question to get, being the non-lawyer in the group, and I'm super passionate about this. So I, over the past few years, have hired a total of 12 people. One had privacy background. That's it. I feel like privacy, as we've talked about through this whole conversation, it's always changing, it's always evolving, and there is no expert, right? So I don't, as a hiring manager, I don't necessarily look for that privacy background. I look for those diverse skill sets, not just the D&I pillars, right? The diverse background. Like, I hired a sales guy because I want to know, like, why are we the roadblock? How are we preventing, the sales aspect? I hired a data guy, right? I hired a reporting guy. I hired a minister, ordained minister who is a youth pastor, and he's on my team now. I've hired someone from a marketing agency because I wanted to understand, you know, that aspect. I've hired lawyers. So I look at it as like, what is missing from my team's knowledge base and who can add to that? I'll teach you privacy, right? I'll send you to the IAPP to get your certs. I'll send you to trainings. I'll send you to the global summit. I'll do all of that. I'll teach you that. I look for those skill sets that are almost missing from my team and an area that we don't know about. If we were missing the digital advertising, my next candidate is going to be that digital advertising background and not necessarily the privacy background specifically. So I think for a lot of us, it might be less about the actual privacy experience and more about those diverse skills. At least that's my take on the hiring process.
Yeah, that's great advice and really insightful. Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I'm just gonna, and that's awesome, Steph, and I want to be on your team. That sounds really cool. But you know, I think there is a challenge, right? Because when people don't have budget, or when, you know, a company is contending for the first time with really complying with laws, they're going to hire one person and they're going to, you know, often hope that they've got that price. So I think that, you know, there is what I see, you've kind of got that one-man band kind of role. You've got these more sophisticated teams like yourselves really trying to like bring in skill sets, or you've got other, you know, I think Mastercard is a very established program with, you know, very skilled privacy professionals. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about trying to skip. And I think, you know, just throwing a little consulting flag out there. If you have experience, it's very hard. And I think, Kendall, you can talk to the stats. I think most people are trying to hire like 5, if they're trying to hire lawyers, it's 5 to 8 PQE. That's like a sweet spot. And it's hard to gain that experience. Or if you're already 10 years in already doing legal, it's sometimes hard to then come down, even pay or whatever else. I would say consulting is not a bad way to go, because they often will take you in and teach you the privacy, right? And actually really applaud that privacy skill set, or you do your due diligence on who you're trying to look for, and the networking, the IAPP, you can meet people like Steph who will give you those opportunities as well. But I think being really thoughtful about, we covered this earlier, like how have they structured their privacy programs? Is it a run? Is it someone who's not necessarily legal, or is it, you know, what does the program look like? What are their reporting structures? And what problems are they trying to solve? Because it may be like, for example, the change management. If you're a large, in my last role, we actually hired a full-time change manager because we wanted to educate 100,000 people in the workforce about privacy. So that messaging was really important. So know the companies before you start throwing off your CVs.
Yeah, agree with you, Rachel, 100%. And I know I get a lot of reach outs from individuals either in law school or looking to start a career within privacy. And my advice is always to look at a consulting route. Most in-house positions, you know, they have a specific skill gap within that team. Of course, every privacy program is at a different maturity level. But there's usually a specific skill gap within that team. Whereas in consulting, you will have exposure to many different kinds of businesses in all different industries, privacy programs at all different stages, working on all different kinds of things. So you'll get a really holistic overview. And once you spend time in that consulting firm, that consulting business, and gain all that experience, you'll have an understanding as kind of like where you want to go next and what you forecast is the next best move for you.
Ron, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, one other thing I would say is just, you know, be willing to raise your hand if you're, particularly if you're in a small company, or even if you're in a large company. I've yet to run up against a privacy program that says we have all the people we need and we could not use any additional help right now. And I've seen people manufacture privacy experience for themselves in many different situations. You know, whether that's raising your hand and saying, "Hey, has anybody updated the privacy notice for California? You know, I'd love to do that myself." You know, or maybe have we looked at how we're marketing our products and services in a digital way, and do we have a grasp on that? I'd like to be the person that looks into that and reports back. And then all of a sudden you're building privacy experience for yourself. Even if you don't have a definitive privacy role, there are ways to get privacy experience in most situations. If you're within a company, or even if you're interning, just sort of being creative about what you could volunteer yourself for and what that would look like on your resume, 6 months or a year from now.
That's really, really good advice. And so I hope people take that to heart. And while Kendall is looking at the next question, I'll just add quickly, especially for law students on this call, as a legal hiring manager, I know it's hard for law students, both in privacy and to sort of break to in-house kind of right out of school. That's a very difficult thing to do. So I know it leaves people kind of lost. I would say be willing to raise your hand for privacy roles that are not necessarily legal roles like Steph is talking about. She sometimes hires lawyers into a compliance role, into her privacy office. And then guess what happens? It's a real pipeline for me, because when I have an open privacy position, and this has happened in the past, and I see, oh, someone in the privacy office has a law degree and they already work here and they already know the bank and they know everyone in the privacy office, guess who's a pretty prime candidate for that open legal role? So that's just my thought. Kendall, if there are more questions, maybe
If
we
you
can take one
can't
or two
tell,
more.
he stole someone from my team recently. That wasn't obvious.
And we'll continue to do so.
I gave her up willingly. I gave her up.
Yeah, I'm just thumbing through some of these questions. A lot of them have the same general theme, which I hope we were able to address here for everyone. If not, feel message in the chat box. I see someone messaged about seeing a lot of job postings asking for experience in products and privacy engineering, which has been really, really exciting to speak about and to pick people's brains about. This individual asks, how can I gain and demonstrate at least a basic understanding of the privacy engineering / tech aspects of privacy? I'm thinking in a different world, we would need more than 7 minutes to answer this question, but.
Yeah, Kendall, I can talk really quickly to that. I did the CMU privacy engineering certificate last year, I think it was, which is not, and it was actually my own investment into my career, something I was really interested in. That isn't cheap, but I thought it was a really fantastic program. And there's even they do like a year-long graduate program as well, if someone really wanted to bed those experience, but also look at various industry groups. Ethica, for example, is a really big proponent on jobs boards for privacy engineering. There's a lot of looking at the companies and what they're doing, or looking at associations. You can start to get exposure and experience in those ways. But privacy engineering is another one that's being built. It really is at its infancy. And I think even just reaching out to people like in these exercises and learning and getting advice is a helpful way to start too.
That's great. And so as we sort of come to the end here, I would just look to each panelist. Maybe you can just give us one sentence or two about what's most interesting or what you like the most about working in the privacy space. Maybe Ron, we can go over to you and go around the horn.
Sure. I think one thing that I really appreciate the most about it is that it allows you to grow with it. I've been a privacy professional for 15 years, but what my job looked like 15 years ago versus what it is now is very, very different. And it's going to look a lot different 2 or 3 years from now. It's just constantly growing. And because the industry is growing, the opportunities, even if you just kind of stay in your same role, are going to grow for you. And there's endless opportunities to build upon your knowledge, your expertise, and your experience. And it's just a fantastic industry to be a part of.
Steph, any what you like the most, or any other final thoughts?
It's never boring, never a dull moment, never the same scenario that comes up twice. So I never feel sort of stuck in my role. I feel like I'm always growing. I'm always learning something new. I'm always working on something, groundbreaking or just bizarre.
Ali?
Yeah, I mean, to build on what Ron and Steph said, no 2 days are the same. I get to do so many different things on a day-to-day basis, whether it's drafting documents or just advising or investigations. It keeps the practice interesting, and it makes it fun.
Rachel?
I'm getting a bit more indulgent in my response. I always had this sense that, I have friends doing far more noble things in climate change and other areas, but I always had this sense that we didn't know what we were doing with all this data, right? And that it was all going to come to bear one day, and what I was doing was actually really important. ChatGPT was the first time that I was like, oh, hey, this is really kind of scary. So I echo what everyone else is saying, in that it's really fascinating. I'm never a dull moment, never surprised what someone has done, which always surprises me, that, particularly from a breach response. But yeah, it matters. Like what we're doing, I like to think it may be a little bit, but I do think what we're doing is important for data in the long run. When you look historically where a lot of this started, it was about protecting people, protecting sensitive data, protecting, for various reasons. So I think it's a very important industry that we're working in.
Thanks. So I just want to say, like I said up top, this panel came about because just so many people reach out to me, which I love, and people are welcome to reach out to me, and I will talk to as many people as I can. And I'm sure I speak for the folks on this panel as well that, we welcome that interaction. But the idea was to sort of have this conversation in a broader group to speak to as many people as we could at once. And so I hope people have found this useful. It's obviously a continuing conversation, and I think we can continue to put on these type of panels and talk about these issues. I know even when I moderate these things, I end up learning a lot too, just by listening to my peers. And so that's great. I really want to thank each and every one of our panelists who, again, are here for no other reason than they really care about the privacy profession and want to develop those folks who are looking or are sort of at the beginning of their privacy careers. And so I really appreciate and value their insights. And like I said, I always learn a lot when I hear from them all. And so a thank you to all of them, and a big thank you to Kendall, my co-moderator, and to Lawrence Harvey, who did the hard work of actually pulling all the technology and all of us together. And so we really, really appreciate it. Again, I hope you found this useful. It was recorded, so feel free to listen again and again at your leisure or share it with whomever you'd like. But thanks so much for attending. And when we do it again, we will publicize it, and I hope you'll join again. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much, everyone.